The last time a rich guy decided to make a statement with a car, we got the Cybertruck. So this is refreshing. The Ineos Grenadier is what you get when you want an old school body on frame Land Rover Defender, and you have enough money to start your own company and start building it on your own instead of buying a used one. So we're going to put this thing through all of the Edmunds tests on road and off, and then we're going to tell you how it stacks up against all of the other retro off-roaders that we tested, because here at Edmunds, we test everything. Up first, we have our acceleration test, which covers both the 0 to 60 mile an hour and quarter-mile times. The Grenadier completed the sprint from 0 to 60 in 8.8 seconds, which is slower than some similarly sized and priced off-roaders that we've tested recently. The same thing is true of the quarter mile, where its 16.6 second time was also well behind the competition. While Ineos is a new company, what's powering it is not. This is actually powered by a BMW sourced powertrain, the B58 powertrain, and that is a turbocharged 3-liter straight 6, mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission. This is a powertrain that we're very familiar with. Any basically BMW where its trim name ends in a 40 has this engine. So that's 3 Series, 4 Series, X5, X7, yada, yada, yada. Other ones, even the Toyota Supra. And in this form though, it's been changed a little bit. So it's been detuned to make less power, but it make all of its torque at a lower RPM. So a lot less horsepower here. And I will say after driving it, it's got plenty of power for being on the road, but this thing doesn't quite sprint like you might expect given the powertrain that it has. This thing has a fully boxed ladder frame, live axles front and rear, and our vehicle came with a rugged pack equipped, which means that in addition to locking front and rear discs, you're also getting an all-terrain tire, a Bridgestone KO2 that's very aggressive with its tread. And that tire is great off-road, but on-road is not gonna provide you a bunch of grip. And that really culminated in some poor results when it came to braking and on our skid pad. So to go from 60 to 0 miles an hour, the Grenadier took 152 feet, and that's a lot of feet. And that was on its first braking run. On subsequent runs, it started to do worse. It went like 160 feet, then 170 feet. So we saw some really poor braking performance as the runs went on. And on our skid pad, these tires don't provide any grip. It's also got a very soft suspension and stability control that kicks in early. Only managed a 0.61 G on our skid pad, and that's a bad number. This is a new vehicle from a British automaker. So to help translate some of this stuff, we're going to turn to our own in-house Brit to help translate. How do you pronounce this? Is it Grenadier, Grenadier?
It's Grenadier. A Grenadier is a member of the armed forces that throws grenades, but it's also the name of a pub in central London where the idea for this off-roader was dreamed up.
What's a pub?
A pub is like a bar with a much better atmosphere. So Ineos was a petrochemical company, hugely successful that nobody had heard of. Now they own part of the Mercedes Formula One team, the Belstaff clothing brand, the performance division of Manchester United, Nice Football Club, Team Ineos Grenadiers, Tour de France team, and probably lots of other stuff. America's Cup, lots of things. Google them.
The handling circuit is also not the Grenadier's friend. Instead of the electronic power steering setup you're gonna find in basically every other vehicle, this has a hydraulic power steering setup, a recirculating ball actually, the same thing you'll find in a vehicle like the Jeep Wrangler. That means that much like the Wrangler, this vehicle has what our DP likes to call movie steering, and that is if I'm driving in a straight line, you can see that I can actually wiggle the wheel like this and the vehicle doesn't actually respond at all. Now the strange thing is that on the freeway, I actually think it kind of tracks pretty straight even though you have some looseness in the wheel, but it does mean that turn-in is a bit delayed. So if I'm gonna turn into a corner here, I kind of have to do it early, and there's a bit of unpredictability on how quickly it's actually going to turn in. The other thing that's unpredictable is that this wheel doesn't like to unwind. So in basically any other normal car you're gonna drive around, as you start to let go of the wheel, it will naturally sort of straighten. And here with this wheel, what I've noticed is that there are times when, especially you're doing kind of low speed turns, the wheel doesn't unwind on its own and the wheels will just kind of stay tracking this direction and you have to physically turn it back to center. If it's something that you know is going to happen, you can kind of prepare yourself for it. But if you don't know the first time or the second time or the third time, it's a bit unnerving. I actually think that for what it is, the Grenadier actually has pretty decent ride quality. Even with these all-terrain tires on, they're not too noisy, and I think that inside the cabin doesn't suffer from the same wind noise problems that you get with the Wrangler and the Bronco. So while this isn't the most refined driving vehicle, it's serviceable for when you're on the street. Just, you know, you got to watch out for that steering. And, you know, if you ever wanted to be in the movies, you can be now. In this video, we're talking about the Grenadier's testing number, but this vehicle, like all the other vehicles we have here at the Edmunds test track, will get a full rating. So for more info about the Grenadier, head over to edmunds.com. So the instrumented testing was not the kindest to the Grenadier, but personally, I don't care all that much. I am still rather chuffed, and that's a good thing. And that's because it's so cool. Look at this thing. It's so close to the look of the OG Defender that Land Rover tried to go back and trademark the OG Defender after they announced that they were going to stop making it, but they were unsuccessful. So Ineos was allowed to build the Grenadier, and I'm so glad that they were. I also love this interior, which for no particular reason has these awesome panels here and in the ceiling that make you feel like you are driving an airplane. Now, young Brian, my dream job was to be a fighter pilot, and he's probably a little bit disappointed that I turned out to be an auto journalist. But driving the Grenadier, this is the closest to Top Gun that I'm going to get. It just oozes cool, and I know I use that word so many times, but it's just an awesome, awesome vehicle. All other car makers, they have established designs, established buyers, preconceived notions of what a vehicle from that brand needs to be like. But Ineos, all they made before this was chemicals, and they took that freedom and they really ran with it, and they basically built this thing thinking what would be cool. And what they wanted to make was a purpose-built off-roader, so it's time to get off-road. So we got the Grenadier here up on the Ziggurat, and as you can see, it made it to about the third step. Now this vehicle, it does have locking front and rear discs, but what it doesn't have is a disconnecting front sway bar like you'll find on some other vehicles like the Wrangler Rubicon or our long-term Bronco. And that means that it doesn't quite have the front suspension flexibility of those other vehicles, though as you can tell by where that rear wheel is, it still has a lot of travel at all four corners. But for us, what was most impressive once we got it up here was a chance to look at the underside. And when you get down under here, you can see that this thing is really, really built up. Everything is basically protected. There's giant skid plates front and rear. There's even a really big skid plate right over the fuel tank. So everything that you want to be protected is. And if you can look at this frame here, we have a good look at this fully boxed ladder frame. And even looking down here at things like the control arms, everything is just really beefy and built up. There's nothing hanging low that you would be afraid of really dragging on a rock. It just kind of speaks to how it's designed to take it off-road and to do so without having to worry. One other thing to notice is that the Grenadier isn't rolling on really big, beefy 35-inch all-terrain tires. These are actually 31.6-inch tires. And Ineos says that that's because if you went any bigger with the tire, you would lose some suspension travel because it would rub up here. So you can put a bigger tire on here. It will fit in the fender, but if you go bigger, you probably want to add a lift kit so you retain that flexibility. All right, it's time for the next challenge. You know it, you love it. It's the hill climb. So right now I'm in 4 high with the Grenadier put in its off-road mode. Off-road mode sort of loosens out the stability control, which is what we want out here. It'll allow some slip of the wheels, and it also, though, turns off things like the seatbelt monitoring, the parking sensors and stuff. So it's really, really only meant for off-road. All right. We are not going to make it any further than this in 4 high. We're gonna put it into 4 low, and we're gonna try to do it with just the center diff locked. How far we can get like this. Same sort of problems that we had in 4 high. So now it's time to do the rear lockers. Let's see how far we can get with just the rear locked. Oh, we made it past that part. So we're still moving up the hill here. So for all the experience that I've had with this engine, it's all been on-road. This is the first time I've driven the engine with low range. Ineos tells me that max torque comes on at just 1700 RPM, and combine that with a good ratio and a transfer case, and you get really, really nice, even power output. So Grenadier made it up with just the rear diff locked, which is pretty impressive. You could still feel some scrabbling at the front, like the fronts were grabbing for traction. If we had put the fronts on, this thing would have crawled up even easier. But yeah, on the hill climb, very impressed with the even power delivery and torque output from this powertrain. Driving this thing up the hill actually reminded me a lot of doing it in the GX. They both made it up with the same amount of ease, just with very different approaches. The GX has a lot of technology behind you helping, while in the Grenadier, it's all very old school. It's all very mechanical. One's not necessarily better than the other, but there is something really charming about the approach of this vehicle. One of the things that I've been watching out for while driving the Grenadier around has been build quality, because we've had sort of bad experiences with a lot of different startup vehicle companies when it comes to that. But here in the Grenadier, there haven't really been any noticeable build issues. The interior feels really well put together, very solid, no weird creaks or rattles. None of the trim pieces feel like they're gonna fall off. All the gaps look pretty good as well. And I think that this is really for two reasons. One is that this is a pretty simple vehicle. So a lot of problems that we've had with these other vehicles have really been software related, but I think the fact that they tried to sort of dial down the complexity with the Grenadier made it actually easier to get right the first time. And the second reason is that this was built at a factory that Ineos didn't build themselves. It was an existing vehicle factory. It was actually owned by Mercedes-Benz. It's in France, and it's where they built the Smart 42 Electric, a small electric vehicle, and now they build the Grenadier there. I think all those factors kind of come together to give you a vehicle that right out of the box for a first vehicle has been quite impressive from a build quality standpoint. Okay, I'm pulling up to our next challenge, and that's the pipes. And this is sort of a very good test of the vehicle's articulation, clearance, all that good stuff. Now, I have the sneaking suspicion that this vehicle is going to do quite well on this obstacle, and that's because the Grenadier has 10.5 inches of ground clearance, and that's about an inch more than the G-Class had, which we made it over this obstacle with, and it also has quite good approach, breakover, and departure angles as well. The one thing that this vehicle doesn't have, though, is a surround view camera. It just has a rear view camera, so I'm going to be spending a lot of time looking at our spotter John. Time to go. The Grenadier's clearance seems to be so good that we're able to actually kind of go through this section a lot quicker than we would normally. So you really got to just crawl your tires up sort of one at a time. This truck has an absolutely awful turning radius. The other thing that's also a bit tough is that the throttle dexterity is letting me down a little bit. It's a bit difficult to feed in the precise amount of power. The Grenadier completed both sections of the pipes much more quickly and with far less drama than the G550 Professional. And it also went way further than both the GX and Land Cruiser, which didn't even have enough clearance to try to attempt the second half of this test. One thing that surprised me was a bit how difficult it was to feed in power. On the hill, it was great, nice, really even power, but here when you're really trying to just feed a little bit of power at a time, a little bit more struggle. But otherwise, the clearance, the angles of this vehicle really shone there and made it over both sets of pipe really without much incident. One of the other things that I appreciate about the Grenadier is it has a really extensive options list, and it's all basically just off-road equipment, so you can really option this thing out however your heart desires. So if you want a ladder on the back, or even if you want these checker plates that you can put on the front fenders that can support up to 300 pounds, so you can actually stand on them to have easier access to the roof. The roof rack also optional. You can get these safari windows, these panels up here in front of the front seats. That's the one option I wish that this vehicle we're testing really had. And you can even option things like a shovel if you really need that. It's just a very fun, extensive options list and gives the vehicle a really high level of customizability. Okay, and now we come to finally my favorite of the test, and that is our run here through the wash. I have the Grenadier set up in its off-road mode, which also disables much of the stability and traction control. It's not completely off, but almost all the way off, and that lets me use the throttle here to really get some wheel slip and help steer the vehicle. First thing to discuss is the powertrain. Plenty of power, definitely enough to get the rear end loose and get through sort of anything that's in the way here. But there is a problem with this powertrain, and that is it just can't seem to stay in the right gear. I drove this in the regular mode and it was always a gear too high. I'd really want it to be a gear down low to really get that power response. Even here in manual mode, it loves to upshift a little too much. I'm trying to get it to stay like in second gear around some of these corners, but it just loves to go into third. And then it doesn't let me shift back down into second when exactly I would want it to. to really get that power, but it's just that the transmission isn't really agreeing with me. It's a lot of work. You just got to make sure constantly that you're downshifting and trying to get into that power band to really shoot out of these corners. Overall, it feels pretty stable, but the steering is a bit of a problem. You can see I'm pricking pretty hard with the wheel here. So as I turn into a corner here, you'll normally just let the wheel sort of go with your hands a touch, and the wheel will unwind naturally, and then I'm able to catch it and apply the amount of lock that I need. But this wheel just gets stuck. So if I toss it into the right here and I let it go, it won't actually go back left. I have to manually steer it all the way back out. And once you know that, you're able to kind of predict it. But it is just, oh man, it's a lot of work to get this thing going. Your hands are just constantly moving, and especially when you're trying to get very quickly through a corner and get all the way to opposite lock. Oh, it's a high level of effort. I don't know if you could tell, but I am sweating, and that's not because the air conditioning in this vehicle doesn't work well. It works quite well, actually. It's because piloting this thing is high effort. We've shown you the testing numbers, and we've shown you what the Grenadier can do off-road. But the thing that I will remember most about this vehicle is that it basically achieved exactly what it was supposed to do. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has built an old school off-roader that is unique in today's automotive environment. There's really nothing else that drives and feels like it, both for better and for worse. And the things that are worse, you kind of forgive them because, you know, just like how bad news is better delivered in a British accent, this thing has an undeniable British cool factor, kind of like the Beatles, kind of like Sean Connery.
Well, actually, Sean Connery's Scottish.
Don't care. Now, there's one thing that you can't really get around, and that is its price. And at $83,000 as tested, that's a lot of coin for something that doesn't come with a lot of the modern amenities that you might expect. That's about the same price that you would pay for the Lexus GX that we had out here previously, and I think the GX has a better powertrain and was definitely much better in the wash. But the one thing that the GX doesn't do is be as cool as this Grenadier is. And the GX is a cool vehicle. I think it looks great, but this thing, I love it. Do I love it for that much money? Maybe not, but I would not be upset waking up and seeing that in my driveway every morning. Thanks for watching. We say perhaps the most British thing about the Grenadier for last, and that is this toot button here on the steering wheel, which is a very polite way to let cyclists or pedestrians know that you're coming. So cute.